ready.
All right. So again, hello everyone, and I'm really very happy to kickstart this 3-episode series called MaaS Talks, Mobility as a Service in 3 episodes. For those who don't know me, my name is Eleonora too, and I'm the coordinator of the ICARUS project at the Institute of Transport and Logistics, which is based in Bologna, Italy. And today, joining me, I have Gabriele from Red Mint, who will host the webinar, and our special guest, Marti Joffre, who will be introduced later. So just a few words about the ICARUS project. So ICARUS is funded by the Interreg Italy-Croatia program, and we work on a number of solutions, of mobility solutions, which are based on multimodality, ICT, and generally speaking, the solutions that can adapt smart mobility in a digital world. We have a number of pilots and testing activities, so I do invite you to visit our website so you can learn more about them. But most of all, we have 3 pillars that we really work on. The first one is behavioral change. We have ICT, and the third and very important pillar is MaaS, which is of course the focus of these webinars. So through this 3 webinar journey, we'll explore the potential of the integration of a range of sustainable transport solutions into a single mobility service, accessible and on demand. So when we talked, me and Gabriele, we agreed that the objective of the webinars is to analyze the main steps which are needed to support the creation of a common ecosystem of services, making the use of sustainable mobility more efficient, attractive, and affordable for the final user. In fact, I think that today, at least in Italy, but also across Europe, MaaS is still a baby, is still at a very early stage, although we have some pretty advanced experiences. And really what we want to do is to present them to you and to see what is the path that we suggest municipalities and other actors can take, and also recommendations really. So we'll try to answer a comprehensive range of research questions. So what are the social, environmental, and economic benefits of MaaS? What is MaaS actually, and how can we select efficient solutions and MaaS models for our territories? We'll also try to focus a lot on inclusiveness, which is quite a big topic today in mobility, and also how can MaaS support remote areas, and how can these peripheral areas benefit from MaaS. And okay, so I just said that we'll have a 3 webinar journey. Today obviously is the first one, and we'll introduce MaaS and its functionalities. So before I leave the floor to Gabriele, just a few words to let you know how it will work. So as you probably noticed, this webinar is being recorded, and it will be online through the YouTube channel of the ITL Foundation, and also through the ICARUS channels. If you can, please do avoid speaking and while the webinar is on, so please mute yourself. Of course, there will be chances to ask questions and to interact with us after Gabriele and Marti have talked a little bit about our topic today, and that will be at the very end. So in the meantime, of course, you can write your observations or comments or any question you may have in the chat box. So that being said, again, thank you so much for taking part today, and I'll leave the floor to Gabriele.
Thank you very much, Eleonora. I will now share my screen, and I welcome you from my side to this first appointment with our MaaS Talks. As Eleonora said, there will be 3 episodes. We will start with an introduction to MaaS and its functionalities, and we will start basically with you. So the first step will be to have to ask you to share your view on the integration of mobility services and what is more important according to your experience or your feelings about this very complex topic with the first poll. So I kindly ask you to reach quickly the menti.com website and digit the following code, so 59830796, and answer to our let's say introductory question: which aspects are most important in order to enable multimodal and integrated mobility? I give you a few minutes to few seconds.
Allora,
Gabriele, sorry, can you please show the numbers, the code numbers again?
Sure.
Yeah.
Here it is.
Thank you.
Welcome.
They're also available in the chat box and above the slide.
Processing. Okay, I think more or less we reached a balance, and so the options were, as you have read, multimodal journey planner, real-time information, booking and payment, ticketing, and user registration. From what we know about MaaS applications and MaaS experiences, of course, we have, as some of you might know, different levels of complexity of functionalities which can be enabled by a MaaS platform. Well, all functionalities are important as enablers of a MaaS, of a mobility as a service initiative. We see from our first results that your perception is very much focused on the, let's say, information related functionalities. On one side, we see the multimodal journey planner as basically the core aspect, the core element, so sharing the information as a start for the integration of services. On the other side, of course, real-time information is something that adds a lot of quality of how we are used to intend sustainable mobility or public transport and other related services. And I would not underestimate the fact that, of course, the collection of data and information is also very important for planning, adaptively planning, and dynamically adjusting the mobility offer as such. Another element, of course, is the ticketing, as it emerges from your preferences. The idea of having an easy access to the payment, but especially to the ticketing systems, of course, supports in a quite decisive way how we intend to develop what we can call a seamless mobility experience. Anyway, all these elements, as we said, are very important. What we will see in these seminars is that the way these elements are built is the way we are going then to shape our MaaS approach. So during our third seminar's journey, we are trying to identify the main elements which are most important in order to design according to your needs a mobility as a service system, but also ecosystem which is fitting the purpose. So let's step back a minute and start from the beginning. What is mobility as a service? We have a definition of mobility as a service, which defines it as a system, better an ecosystem, so where different elements are somehow in equilibrium, an integrator of mobility services, which is using a digital interface to make mobility basically accessible and somehow seamless for the final user. So in the talks, we will investigate these aspects and how they can be interpreted in order to build a MaaS system in different contexts, cities and regions. Putting together the first results of your feeling through the poll and this definition, what can we say? What is MaaS for? MaaS is, for public authorities, an instrument for better planning and coordinating the mobility offer. For the users, is basically a way to fulfill mobility needs in a seamless way. For operators, and here is a bit more complex, a bit more tricky, I would say, is a tool to develop and promote services and attract more demand. But is also a tool which will enable a different level of competition and needed collaboration to make it work. And here is where the different market models and mobility business models will make the difference, and this will be the topic of especially of our second talk. So let's have a look at how a MaaS concept could look like. We have from the picture on our left side the supply side. The supply side is can be clustered in transport services, supportive services of infrastructure such as charging facilities, parking facilities, infrastructure, toll systems, and so on, and then possibly other services which are somehow enriching the experience of the traveler. Coming back for a second to the transport services, which are part of the MaaS concept, of course, we have a broad range of services which are shared, flexible, mass transportation, personal transportation, and so on, and that are characterized by different levels of flexibility on one side and of, let's call it sharing. From the mass transportation, many people sharing the same bus or train, to more, let's say, newer services like the vehicle sharing, which represent new forms of mobility that must be integrated into an ecosystem. Then we have the MaaS operator in the middle, which is some sort of interface between the demand and supply. What does it mean? It's a unique access point for the user in order to be enabled to access all the services which join the system. Actually, this is a quite simplified picture, as most of you might have noticed, where there are several options for what you see, the MaaS operator box, in which we have both a MaaS platform operator and a MaaS or a number of MaaS operators providing the MaaS service. These different options will correspond to different business and organizational models, which are different because they depend both on the MaaS strategies, which are set mainly at the public level, and also by the characteristics of the mobility offer. So who are the actors from the supply side, and not only. And this, as an introduction, will, let's say, is intended to pave the way to more specific points, both on the planning side and on the analysis of the market, which we will see in the next episodes. So we said the MaaS concept is made by a plurality of actors from the supply and the demand side, but is also made from different functionalities and different levels of evolution, let's call them like that. So the question is, how far MaaS goes in integrating mobility? There are indeed different levels, as you can see. So we start from a level which is not represented here, which is the no integration level, where every service is a standalone services. We move up to a level where the information is integrated, multimodal travel planners, information on prices, but tickets cannot be bought, journeys can be planned, the real integration between different services has yet to come. We move from a second level where we can integrate booking and payment systems in order to create a single trip experience from the planning to the performing of the service. And then there is a third level, which is the so-called integration of the service offer, which is the level where basically the game becomes more interesting for integrators and MaaS platforms. It's a business level, let's call it, where through the definition of different contracts, subscriptions, and mobility packages, or let's say bundling of services, new mobility offer under the market point of view is created. Of course, the pre-requirement for reaching level 3 is to have enabled the previous functionalities, the functionalities which allow to perform a single trip. And then there is actually a fourth level, which is the level of integration of societal goals, which is, of course, the target of each public administration, which is strategic and visionary enough to see the potential of mobility as a service, which is actually a level which is very seldom, or we could say, but we will ask our experts also later, almost nobody has reached completely so far, which is the level to which mobility as a service is integrated into a set of policies, and it's supported and fostered by a range of incentives and targeted actions and so on, in order to fulfill sustainable mobility goals and, in general, sustainable development goals. So, as we start picturing, mobility as a service is not just a set of technologies making transport more efficient, more accessible, and so on, but it has it brings together a whole range of new opportunities for the mobility sector, and of course a corresponding range of challenges that have to be faced in order to reach the highest level and to reach the highest, let's say, common objectives. looking at the opportunities side, we can say, first of all, the main opportunity related to the objective of MaaS implementation is to reduce the car dependency and car use, basically offering suitable and efficient alternatives. Let's say, talking of KPIs to measure the success of MaaS for public policymakers, especially. One KPI would be the reduction of car ownership rates, for example. This is a good proxy of how well your integrated system is working. A second opportunity is represented by the possibility of enabling preference-based mobility choices. So fulfill basically the needs of the demand side of citizens which have more complex mobility paths, more composite mobility needs, and so on. This has to be reached, of course, for everyone, but can, let's say, enhance accessibility, especially for those citizens which have special needs, not only vulnerable groups or temporary impaired citizens, but also citizens with different needs of transportation, because they are supposed to, because they made the choice of completely substituting private mobility with a different concept represented by MaaS. Another opportunity is represented by a different paradigm in terms of analyzing the costs and the savings of our daily mobility. Actually, real mobility costs of families are often underestimated, and comparing different alternatives is rather complicated. How many of us really know the real cost of owning one or more cars for our daily needs or weekly or monthly needs, with the real cost and expenses of public transports and other services which occur into our families. This is a quite complex analysis and comparison to be done. Mobility as a service is also a way to bring more transparency under this point of view and foster more rational choices. Another opportunity provided by mobility as a service is to reach a better knowledge and to have easier access in general to sustainable mobility. We could say mobility as a service puts services on a map with the objective of putting people on the bus. While, let's say, showing how an integrated system can work and will work, you foster the adoption of more sustainable modes. The range of opportunities is not finished, as you can see. Of course, in general, from the supply side, mobility as a service enables a more efficient use of resources. Enables possibilities of distribute traffic flows more efficiently, shifting from highly used services and routes to alternatives, suggesting less congested options, and also planning better the mobility offer, and planning in a more dynamic way, so allowing a certain level of adaptation of the offer. Last but not least, a great opportunity of a well-constructed mobility as a service ecosystem is to improve accessibility and to foster social inclusion, offering more affordable mobility options and more personalized mobility services fulfilling the composite citizens' needs. Of course, as we said before, with the opportunities come the challenges. So what do we need to make mobility as a service not only work under the technical point of view, but also being aligned with what we want to achieve? We need, of course, first of all, a strategic vision. We need to align the functionalities enabled and the use of the platform of the mobility as a service ecosystem services with the common public policies, mobility objectives, and in general also wider goals of sustainable development. So we need to design MaaS models which fulfill the real needs of users and are able to pursue common objectives. Later on, we will see some examples in which this is somehow included in the building process. A second challenge is indeed to build strong public-private partnerships and collaborative environments, because it is necessary to enable a sort of dynamic evolution of the mobility offer, and this can only be done in a collaborative environment where the public sector as a regulator or coordinator is virtuously interacting with the different mobility providers. And looking at the third challenge, providing a fair access and due trust in order to foster the participation of the different actors into the system. As we said before, engaging private operators into the ecosystem can be complex, can be tricky, because it's a matter of combining private goals with community goals, but at the same time it's connected to the vision. So if the vision is to compete together towards private motorized mobility, for example, in general, towards an unsustainable mobility model, participation and collaboration is triggering a win-win situation indeed. Then we come to challenges which are a bit more, let's say, maybe technical, but substantial. So pre-requirements include data availability, standards and quality, and as we said before, the availability of for sharing data and for creating mobility digital ecosystems. Another element connected to this one is the availability of open and standardized APIs or application programming interfaces. So in order to build a collaborative environment, data must not only be shared, but they have to be dynamic enough in order to be always up to date and enable the interaction of the final users with the services when they need it at the level they need it. Last but not least, there is a challenge which is often underestimated, which is related to the resources for the planning. In general, the fact is that digital integration is often seen as a non-core activity, especially from mobility providers, transport providers, and so on. But actually, what we will see in the next episode talking about the market, this is not really true anymore, because competitive environment and user needs are changing so rapidly that every single participant to the mobility network and possibly to the ecosystem must be up to date, and the set of resources for data management, for adaptation, and for participation are absolutely crucial in order to remain or become strategic players into the market. So now let's have a look of, let's say, what does it mean to build a MaaS system, a bit on the more operational side. So in general, building a MaaS ecosystem, even if I'm not a technician, but what I learned from my researches is that is about enabling functionalities, is about integrating services and infrastructures together into a common system, is about including users, attracting demand, and more in general, including different target groups. Let's see an example of how we should map the different elements and components of a MaaS system when we start planning it. Here we have the example of a MaaS platform where we define a role for the citizen. So let's say a persona or a use case, in this case, a passenger with driver, which can be a passenger of a taxi, of a railway service, a bus service, and so on. And let's see how the mobility as a service system enables certain functionalities which are, let's say, delivered in an inefficient way otherwise, so without a certain degree of digitalization. So through the functionalities which you see on the left, planning, booking, ticketing, payment, billing, real-time information, data protection, and management, the MaaS platform can enable a certain actions and interactions. So it will enable the user to plan and to book multimodal trips, to buy any material ticket, to pay for it and receive a billing, to receive real-time information on how the different legs of its multimodal trip are going to be performed, need to be readapted, etc. And of course, on the same level, the interaction will generate an exchange of data also with the final users related to the routing, to the location, and to the payments. So data which have different levels of sensitiveness, let's say, and that need a certain skill or a certain protocol for the management and for the protection. And data which are very, very precious, not only under the commercial point of view, but also and especially for public administration in order to know better the mobility demand and the mobility pattern and better plan the services for the future. So let's focus just to have a look. Let's have an example. If we want to plan for this specific use case, the first box, so to see how we enable to plan a trip from A to B, we selected before a citizen's role, a functionality, and now we have to focus on the communication aspect. So what we want to build in terms of digital communication and digital interaction. And we see in this case that we have different options that we can enable this function of planning through a multimodal route planner digitally. We can add a mobile navigation. We can, let's say, side it to a mobile navigation system, for example, in order to provide real-time information. So we can basically build a communication channel or a communication service which is non-human managed and is basically immaterial. In some cases, we might need, this is the example of, let's say, a transition period from material to immaterial, or the special assistant to different target groups. We might decide that our mobility as a service ecosystem is going to provide this service also via a travel assistant on the phone for specific services or for specific target groups. And this is an approach which, by mapping the needs of the final user, will allow you to design a little piece of our mobility as a service platform in a, let's say, demand-oriented and inclusive way. So basically, in general, this was an example to show how mapping the relations which are between users, services, functionality, and communication and interaction approaches uh, is giving us a sort of overview on how to build a MaaS. So how does the MaaS building process work, and what is it is supposed to cover. So planning a MaaS system is not easy, not only for the technicians, but also, and I would say especially, for the mobility planners and the policymakers, which have to take into account different needs and different characteristics in order to be inclusive. Now let me spend a few words on some international experiences. I've put them here in chronological order, let's say from their birth date, rather than the MaaS level they reached. Just to point out that the development may be somehow linear as we described, but the paths which are followed into the implementation are not at all. And they depend on aspects such as the public objectives, which represent the priorities, and, for example, the business models which are adopted for the implementation. So this is the case of a platform called WIM. Is a, a platform which was developed and firstly adopted by the city of Helsinki. We can consider it one of the two, let's call them forerunners of mobility as a service at the international level. We can describe it as such, as a journey from a doctoral thesis which sets the basis of a potentially digitally integrated system supporting mobility to a market-oriented initiative, as WIM is. WIM is an application, for those who know it, that aggregates services not only in Helsinki, but today in other cities across Europe, and not only, I would say, around the world. So it's a market-oriented initiative, as we say, with a strong international, say, applicability, and it operates basically on a commercial level, so integrating and aggregating different services on the territory. And I quote this example not only as a forerunner, but also looking at the level it has reached. And nowadays, WIM is implementing the bundling process. So as you can see from the figure, as possible result of your MaaS implementation, is now offering basically mobility packages which are designed on different kinds of user groups. This is still, let me say, a very complex process, the bundling one, from the business and also from the organizational point of view, but it's also an intermediate step towards a complete customization and personalization of the experience, which is what technology should enable for mobility in the future. Another example which we can define a forerunner is an example which has a diametral opposite approach. It's born from a public transport initiative, top-down approach, where the integrated model is provided around public transport. The mobility service platform is provided by a company owned by the public transport company, and is not only integrated the services from the public company, but also other services which can enable further, let's say, levels of say mobility seamless experience. So what is it based on? It's based on the coordination of strategies between the city, the main mobility provider, and the other providers. And to add some other element, is basically running in parallel to the physical integration process. Nowadays, this project, this experience of mobility as a service through the app VinMobil in Vienna, is running in parallel to a development project for infrastructure, so-called mobility points, so intermodal points where shared mobility and traditional mobility are integrating in order to enable also the physical seamless experience towards the customer. So it's a very interesting approach, completely different from the previous one. So territorially oriented, and that, of course, as all models, has certain shortcomings, but reinforces the idea that there is not a good model. There are no good models and bad models. There are different models fitting for different contexts, not only territorial, but also in terms of market, business, and public objectives, of course. Just to give you a quick idea of what we have into this platform, these are the services which are integrated. We see car rental, bike sharing, car sharing, taxi, e-scooters, parking, and so on. Enough said about these two forerunner experiences. I wanted to introduce you as last case study, the case of the City of Antwerp, where the mobility as a service ecosystem is under construction, but is under construction adopting, since 2016, adopting a very, very interesting participated approach. The project which gave the birth to this approach is called Smart Ways to Antwerp, and is represented by a set of mass enabling measures which have been implementing during the years. First of all, the backbone of this system is a route planner, which has been designed by the city once they realized that there was no service which was enough aligned on the market to the city objectives, so to the common objectives. So the route planner has been built according to the direction of the policy makers and with the participation of the users, basically in order to be able to influence the routing logic. For example, it can define certain user scenarios which should not be suggested because in conflict with public objectives. So if the public objective is to promote active mobility, the multimodal route planner is not supposed to suggest short trips by motorized vehicles, for example. This is just an example. But this is, as we said, is the backbone or the triggering point, but is not the only element of the strategy. The main element of the strategy is represented by the mobility marketplace. So in general, the city is endorsing and allowing to participate in the ecosystem services which, let's say, share common objectives and fulfill certain requirements. What did the city do in order to attract ideas, projects, and so on? It started building on private solutions and ideas and hints through calls for proposals which attracted different projects and different companies. The first two rounds of calls were focusing on the testing of innovative solutions. So innovative solutions which were somehow filling the gap of competitiveness between private mobility and the traditional public transport network. The second round of calls in 2019 focused on the integration of different services among each other in order to create critical mass. And the last one in 2020, the call which has been launched at the end of last year, is focusing now on the integration of the routing API into the applications of private providers. So basically realizing the strategy designed in the beginning of having a system which is somehow building on public objectives and is influencing the behavior of users, but also the offer of mobility providers. And this is absolutely, let's say, an interesting and outstanding example on how market-oriented approaches and regulatory coordinated strategies can coexist in the same planning process. Of course, it takes effort, it takes also money, but indeed, this shows that this is possible. So after giving you a few hints on, let's say, what are the basic principles, I hope everything was interesting and somehow new to you on mobility as a service. I would like to introduce my friend Martí Joffre from Barcelona, from Factual, managing partner of Factual, which is a company which is engaged in several European projects on innovation and digitalization in mobility. And I would like to ask him a couple of questions as expert. So welcome, Martí. You can hear me?
Good afternoon, Gabriele. I'm here.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for being here with us. So I start immediately with the first question. My first question for you is, what are the main barriers, in your opinion, to the development of MaaS now today, looking in general at the international environment, but also to your experience in Spain?
Yeah, actually, I have to say that they are quite aligned to those that you have mentioned before. We went through a study with local stakeholders in Barcelona, both public and private, to understand which was the elements that were barriers for them to really engage into MaaS. And we came up with very similar conclusions. One of them is regarding the change in the value chain and how this value is distributed among the different stakeholders. Of course, transport service providers, they have now full interaction with the user. They are interacting with them, they are billing them, they control pricing, they can segment their users, they can promote their services. Once there is a new element into the value chain, which is the MaaS operator, they are losing this contact with the user. This is very challenging for them. This is really scary that an actor, normally a digital actor with a lot of power, could eventually, once they get, let's say, the key to the user, they start charging additional fees to the transport service providers behind, and everything related to promotions and to cross-selling of other services is under control of the MaaS operators. So they are losing this power, and how this value and power will be distributing between MaaS operators and public transport service providers is a key element that is blocking many of them to really engage into this and take very careful steps.
Okay.
This is on the private side. On the private side, on the public side, there is, as you mentioned, the risk that the result of giving the control of the user to private MaaS operators at some point could drive user behavior towards not sustainable means of transport. If you look at the business model of MaaS operators, they get probably more revenue from more expensive transport service provider, namely taxi, ride-hailing, etc., which at some point might help to take private cars out of the street, but at the same level, it could bring new users to motorized means of transport. So there is a risk here also as well, which they need to regulate carefully.
Okay, thank you. Let's, if I can ask you another question, let's get into the topic of services. My question is, we have seen, I have shown some examples of rather big cities where services are there, are concentrated, and so on. So the comfort zone for mobility as a service. But is MaaS in the end for everyone? So what services should be included or developed for different territories? What kind of MaaS do you see for low demand areas, for example?
Yeah, what you have shown, we've seen MaaS development so far mostly focused on central core areas of the city. Actually, MaaS is about multimodality, so you need a rich offer of transport service providers. And today this is happening in the core areas of the cities. When you move to second crown, third crown, or even rural areas, this multimodality and different alternatives are disappearing. So MaaS value, it's losing the traction. And actually, at some point, we need a further development of the transport offer before we can build a multimodal MaaS offer on top. And this is a challenge, and this is something that is being addressed at some point, but knowing that low demand areas, of course, make business cases more difficult for transport operators. This can be done through subsidies to private operators so that they make their business case on low demand areas with lower demand their services. And this can be done also by flexibilizing public transport to provide more accessibility, because now we have some regular lines which are not convenient for some users. As long as you flexibilize the option with demand responsive transport apps, which allow you to book the public service according to your specific needs, this will allow a further accessibility of public transport, so getting some more users into the system.
Okay, thank you very much. Very last question, very like 1 minute question. Who will be, in your opinion, the key actors of the mobility as a service of the future?
Well, I would say, let me, before starting with the present, I would say today the key actors are public transport authorities. There is a lot of regulation and business-related aspects that can be only unlocked by active participation of public authorities. They need to realize how to make the MaaS ecosystem work in their regional. They need to regulate that, and this is really what is blocking many of the initiatives in Barcelona, but in many other places. There are good examples that you show where public authorities are taking these steps to really explore the opportunity of MaaS. So they are the key actor today. Regarding MaaS operators, here there is the risk, I would say, but also very likely a scenario that the big international platforms, digital platforms, become like the entry door to all the transport offer worldwide. And we are talking about names that are very familiar to us and we are already using worldwide, like Google Maps, Uber, Moveit, City Mapper, this kind of things. The risk is that if we end up with a very limited number of actors internationally, they will have a lot of power, the aspect we mentioned before, and they will kind of have power of negotiation with local providers, with public transport authorities, local. So this is a risk to avoid probably. How to bring this new actor, which is a MaaS operator, which has a more fluent and fruitful relation with public authorities, with the transport service providers. This is a new actor that needs to appear and is so far kind of struggling to get along.
Thank you very much, Marti. Thank you very much for your enlightening point of view from my side.
Thank you, Gary.
So,
it was a pleasure.
So now we have a few minutes, I would say, for some question and answers. In case I would ask Eleonora to help me moderate in case there are some questions. And the floor is open for discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriele and Marti. So yeah, if anyone wants to go ahead and ask a question, please just turn on your microphone and camera if you want to.